This is a KCCI Commitment 2026 special presentation, Iowa Governor Republican Primary Debate.
Good evening from the KCCI studios here in Des Moines. Tonight, 4 Republican candidates make their case for why they should have a shot at the governor's mansion. I'm Amanda Rooker, Chief Political Reporter for KCCI.
And I'm Dave Price, the Gray Media Iowa Political Director. This debate is produced in partnership with the Gray Media Iowa stations, including KCRG, KTIV, and KWQC. As we know our history here, Republicans have held the governor's mansion for about 2 decades now, but there is no incumbent in the race in 2026, so this seat is wide open. Kim Reynolds, who had been the lieutenant governor back in 2017, assumed the role of governor when then Governor Terry Branstad stepped down to take over as the U.S. ambassador to China, and she has been governor ever since.
That's right. Reynolds went on to win 2 full terms in 2018 and 2022, but now she is stepping aside, and for the first time in about 20 years, the governor's office is wide open. 5 Republicans are now competing for their party's nomination. Let's take a look, learn a little bit more about our candidates. Eddie Andrews lives in Johnston. He was first elected to the Iowa House in 2020 and is now serving his 3rd term there. Andrews is also a pastor and tech entrepreneur.
Zach Lane lives on a farm near Belle Plaine. He's a business owner and farmer. He has never held public office, but he has worked on some campaigns in the past.
Brad Sherman of Williamsburg previously served 1 term in the Iowa House. He's also a pastor and was a co-founder of Informed Choices Medical Clinics.
And Adam Steen lives in Reynolds. Governor Reynolds hired him to lead the Iowa Department of Administrative Services. He served as the director of DAS from 2021 to 2025. He's a pastor and a business development consultant.
4th District Congressman Randy Feenstra is also running for the Republican nomination. He declined to join us tonight. Now, whoever wins this Republican primary race for governor will face Democrat Rob Sand in November. Sand currently serves as the state auditor.
And we want to tell you that the debate you're about to watch was recorded on Saturday, May the 16th. We did this so that it would maximize the opportunity for everyone to be able to fit this into their schedules and take part.
That's right. Now, each candidate tonight will be given 60 seconds to make an opening statement. Before the start of this debate, candidates drew numbers. Opening statements, questions, and closing statements will be offered in the order that they picked. That order is Eddie Andrews, Zach Lane, Brad Sherman, Adam Steen. Each candidate has 1 minute to respond to each question. They will see a red light when they have 10 seconds left and a red flashing light when their time is up. We, the moderators, may interrupt a candidate to redirect if someone drifts off topic. Now, if a candidate is mentioned by their opponent, moderators may, at their discretion, allow 30 seconds for a response. Candidates will also get 60 seconds for closing statements.
All right, so we have 4 candidates, 90 minutes, so we hope that you can be as on time as you can. Mr. Eddie Andrews, you're batting leadoff here. You get 60 seconds for your opening statement.
So first of all, thank you, Iowa, and thank you to the hosts, and thank you for all of you who are watching. My name is Eddie Andrews. I am a 3-term state representative, one of the hardest working guys at the state capitol now. I'm a husband, I'm a father, I am a bilingual pastor, que Dios le bendiga a todos, and I am here because Iowans want bold leadership. Just like I am the first candidate in the history of Iowa to produce a plan, a solid plan, to phase out property taxes. On day 1, I will end eminent domain abuse. I will get Iowa education back to number 1 where it belongs. I will get Iowa business back to number 1 where it also belongs. Today, I have always been about people first. That is my always strategy, and I humbly ask for your vote in June 2nd.
All right, our next candidate, Zach Lane.
Thank you for putting this on. Iowans, thank you for tuning in. You know, our campaign is about putting Iowa first. And since we launched this campaign, we've been really focusing on 4 systemic issues that our state's been facing. Number 1 is that we have our kids leaving the state faster than 46 other states. You cannot build a culture if your people are leaving. Number 2, we've lost 10,000 family farms over the past 20 years, and now a quarter of our state is owned by people who don't live here. Number 3, when I was growing up near Sioux City, we were number 1 in the nation for education. Now we are in the bottom half. And the 4th issue that we cannot ignore anymore is that we have the fastest rate of new cancer of anywhere in the history of the world. My family's been here fighting for Iowa since my great-great-great-grandfather fought as a Hawkeye on horseback in the Civil War. I want to carry that fight for Iowans against special interests, lobbyists, and corporate giants that have been given far too much influence in our government. Thank you.
Brad Sherman, you're next.
Well, it's great to be with Iowa. Great to be with you, Dave and Amanda. I'm running for governor. My wife and I have been all across this state. We've done 99 counties. We've already accomplished that. We've been to 390 events, and because we believe in the grassroots. You know, my wife and I have 4 children and 13 grandchildren. My 2 sons serve in the military. One's a Iraq combat veteran. The other's a captain in the Air Force. And I have 2 daughters. One is helps us every single day, a tremendous blessing. One is watching from heaven. And so, you know, my wife and I moved to Iowa City in 1981 to start a church. We saw the indoctrination that was taking place. It was undermining the foundations of our freedom. And so that set us on a course to begin restoring those foundations of freedom. And that's what our campaign is about, is restoring those foundations of freedom. I have a broad range of experience besides serving in the legislature. I'm a pastor, I'm a patriot, I'm principled, and I'm proven. And we're working hard to earn the votes of Iowans for this governor's mansion.
Adam Steen, your opening statement.
Amanda, thank you. Dave, thank you. My fellow Iowans, I have 18 years in the business sector, 18 years as a business owner, 5 years running the operations of the state of Iowa. I jumped in this race to preserve and protect the culture of Iowa. We have a problem. That problem is Rob Sand. Rob Sand has been running for governor for 7 years. I had the opportunity to work with Rob Sand. I know who Rob Sand is. I know what he says he is. I know what he actually is. I know what he says he does. I know what he actually does. I've been solving problems inside of state government for 5 years. I've been solving problems in business for 18 years. I'm a problem solver. I am a fixer. Together, with your support on June 2nd, we will solve the problems that Iowa has: cancer, education, government spending. Together, we will win. Together, we will keep Iowa free.
Well, thank you all. We want to start tonight with the cost of living. I'm sure you all hear it. We hear it a lot. Iowans are struggling to afford groceries. House and rent costs are climbing. So are utility bills. So Eddie Andrews, we'll start with you. As governor, name one thing you could do to try to make things more affordable for everyday Iowans.
Well, thank you. Listening to thousands of Iowans and being the most visited Iowa state legislator now, I got to tell you, I've listened to so many Iowans, and this is a major concern, especially among our young people who are struggling to get jobs and struggling to maintain homes. I can tell you, first thing on the home front, what is raising higher costs for our homes is all these out-of-state businesses and BlackRock and Vanguard and Berkshire Hathaway buying up homes, raising our cost of living here in Iowa. That will end on day one in an Eddie Andrews administration. Also providing incentives on my RED plan, Rural Economic Development, putting incentives in the rural part of Iowa to make sure that economy is thriving and young people actually want to stay here. So that is part of my plan.
Eddie, thank you. Zach Lane, you're next. Name one area that you could help lower the cost of living and how you do it.
Yeah, I think something that Iowans are talking about very often is property taxes in our state. And I think we need to cut and freeze our property taxes, but we also have to deal with the bigger issue of what's going on with rising costs. I mean, we have a fiat currency in our country that I won't get into right now, but we also have consolidation happening in every major industry. If you want to know why costs keep rising, it's because consumers have less and less choice as big business continues to consolidate and buy up more and give our consumers less options for where they can do business. And it's a failure of the free market. And as Eddie just mentioned, we do have an issue with institutional investors buying up our homes. Right here in Des Moines, single family homes are being bought up by Blackstone. Council Bluffs has the same issue. I have called to ban institutional investors from buying single family homes in our state because our state and our neighborhoods are not profit centers for Wall Street. We can solve these problems, but we have to be willing to confront the issues no matter what special interest or entrenched interest is behind it.
Brad Sherman, what would you do as governor to try to make things more affordable for Iowans?
Well, so much of what we do, you know, in the legislature is a Band-Aid fix. Now, a Band-Aid is very nice when you need a Band-Aid. But we have to start looking at the root problems of why our economy is failing. You know, what happened during COVID was a trampling of our rights and a crippling of our economy. So there are decisions that are being made sometimes that have drastic results. Now, I also have a phrase in my mind that I just keeps running over and over. It's called ag and energy regions. You know, if we start rebuilding rural Iowa and we start having ag regions where we grow the food that we eat, we build an infrastructure, and for 3 years now I've been talking about getting a network of small modular reactors established so that we have a decentralized power base, self-sufficient power base in Iowa. You know, we can start building the infrastructure to then begin, and the network to begin rebuilding rural Iowa, because we're an ag state. We need to get back to that. We need to grow the food we eat. That plays into our health issues and everything else. So it's a big picture plan, and there's many facets to it.
Adam Steen, what's possible at the state level to actually bring down prices for Iowans, make things more affordable?
Yeah, the beauty of my background is that anything's possible inside of state government, inside of cities, counties, and schools. From a cost of living perspective, I see on a regular basis the importance of putting more money into the pockets of Iowans all across the state. 3 simple things that we can do, and they will be simple because I've done this already. Number 1, we need to crush government spending. The government spends too much money. Cities, counties, school boards, even the executive branch. They spend our tax dollars. They should be saving our tax dollars. Number 2, government regulation. The government over-regulates, and it's crushing business, it's crushing industry, and we can deregulate and look for areas to free up the market for businesses to operate more successfully. And lastly, we need more industry in this state. Right now, we have tons of jobs that are available right now, but we need kids, and that's why I'm going to focus on trades, skilled trades within construction, within healthcare, and within the ag industry. Right now, children all across the state of Iowa need to realize that the trades industries are cool, and businesses that are out there right now are ready to hire them so that they can achieve the American dream right here in Iowa.
All right, let's talk about the people's money. For the second straight year, the state is looking at a deficit of more than $1 billion. So Republican legislators have used some of the money that has been in surplus to fill that. Realistically, in your first year as governor, you may have something similar like that unless our revenues go crazy next year or something like that. Will your priority be to continue to use the surplus funds to make sure we have a balanced budget like we have to here in this state, or will you make up that difference by reducing spending by quite a bit? And Eddie Andrews, we can start with you.
Oh, I get the first one again. Well, I can tell you that as a part of the legislature right now, these funds, the chart has been actually planned over the last 5 years. We knew there was going to be a dip. That's why we ran up the score and we put $5 billion in the taxpayer relief fund after putting $900 million in the rainy day fund. However, there are 2 ways to save money, either by lowering your spending and increasing revenue. And as a business person, I've worked for or provided service for all the companies you know, whether it's John Deere, Ag Leader, Corteva, Pioneer, Ameritrade, so on and so forth. And I know a little thing about unleashing the entrepreneurial spirit that we have here. You know, the fifth word of the Bible is create. In the beginning, God created. We have that creative ability here in Iowa, and I will unleash that on day 1.
All right, so will you use surplus to make up for the gap, or how would you do it then?
Well, I think you almost have to use a part of it right now. I don't think you can do that in 1 year.
But you're going to cut spending too? So
We
would you
have
have
to
a
cut
smaller
spending.
budget than this year?
I think you have to look at a zero-based budgeting, and only the ones that pass this test, the litmus test, get advanced.
Okay, Zach Lane, you're next.
You know, I think this is a very important question because we have spending issues, we have revenue issues, we have a down ag economy. There's a lot of things that are playing into this. We need to get off of the taxpayer relief fund as soon as possible. We need to get off of the rainy day fund as soon as possible. It's not sustainable. There's a couple ways we can do this. Number 1, we need to know where every dollar is being spent. I'm calling to put all government transactions publicly available online with the name of the person who approved it. And this way we can have thousands of citizen auditors, regardless of party, that are investigating and verifying what's being spent by the state so we know where we're wasting money. And I think this is something that just causes the people of Iowa to just win. Number 2, what we need to be doing is looking at where we're giving away money that we shouldn't. Right now, we're giving hundreds of millions of dollars in tax breaks to data centers and companies that are cutting jobs in our state. I would first stop those giveaways, bring that money back into the state government's budget, and be able to start to fill those holes before we talk about cutting spending.
Is your first year budget realistically smaller than the current one, or not necessarily?
I think we have to look to see where we're wasting money first. I think that's the first thing we need to look at doing. Before we cut services of Iowans, the thing that we need to make sure we're doing is spending money responsibly. And that's what my plan is in place to do.
Brad Sherman, you know how the sausage is made. You were part of that process when you served in the legislature. How do you look at this for next year's budget?
Well, as it's already been said, we knew this would be the case for the first year or two. We're looking at the Laffer curve. We're going to see if that kicks in and works, if it increases, revenue through cutting taxes. If that happens, great. But it's already been mentioned about data centers. We have 105 data centers in our state, and some of the bigger ones have some most amazing tax breaks you can imagine. That shouldn't be happening. Absolutely should not be happening. Another thing is transparency. When we have transparency in how spending is taking place, then we can push all these changes to the local level. And because one size from Des Moines doesn't fit all. And so I've seen bills come out of Des Moines that hurt some counties, help other counties. And so we need to get the transparency so the local people can see how their local people are spending money. They can cut their budgets there in that community, and they'll know who to elect and who not to elect then once they can see how it's actually being spent. So I think those are just the first couple of steps that can be taken. So there's a lot that needs to be done with then that we can invest our revenue as well.
But so do you assume that you would have to dip into reserves these next several years as sort of planned?
Well,
right
let's
now?
not say several years, possibly 1 year or two, but that's something we have to watch very closely.
All right, Adam Senior, clean up here.
Yeah, absolutely.
How would you handle this first year as governor?
Yeah, having been, again, inside the belly of the beast for 5 years, I oversaw state alignment, which we took 37 agencies down to 16, and that gave me a direct line of sight into where we are spending money and where we shouldn't be spending money. And so right out of the gate, just one area that we would explore and execute to lower costs within state government is span of control with inside of state government. Right now, we have a lot of managers out there that don't oversee the amount of people to make it appropriate for the rest of the classifications of the state of Iowa. We are deficit spending right now. It doesn't mean we're in a deficit. The key is we make sure Rob Sand does not come back into office, so we end up with a Chet Culver era of literal deficits within inside the state of Iowa. We in the Steen administration will increase revenue through business and industry, and we will decrease spend through crushing unnecessary spend across the state right now. I've been there, I've done that, I'm ready to do it again.
Democrats, some believe there will be a Culver-like move that will be necessary because the revenue gap is going to continue to be this way. Do you disagree?
Yeah, having worked with Democrats and seeing how they don't understand how to budget and like to spend money on a regular basis, I don't believe much of anything the Democrats say.
Well, let's move on to talk about Iowa and Iowa's population. I mean, right now, 70 out of Iowa's 99 counties are shrinking. Rural Iowa has been for a long time losing people. That includes younger workers that are leaving at a faster rate. Eddie Andrews, what's the first thing that you would do to change that? And we've seen plans over the past, several years. Why do you believe your plan would work?
So thank you again for calling me first. I love that.
It's all the way you drew it. It keeps the math simple for us.
Ah, okay. I thought
We're simple-minded
it was explained
here.
differently. Okay. Reclaiming my time. So as I mentioned, with part of my RED plan, Rural Economic Development Plan, it really addresses the issue that's critical to our young people. We have so many communities that there's nothing but an elevator there. And we have to put resources intentionally there. I remember during COVID where I'm in the tech industry, and so I knew a lot of people who moved from California temporarily to stay in Iowa since they were coding from home anyway. And so why can't we just do that? Why can't we provide incentives? And I believe we can provide incentives and tax credits to incentivize people to start businesses, making what I call simplification of business. And also on the last question, let me just also say that transparency in everything is critical. Transparency in everything is critical, but also we have to have continual improvement. If you were a business, $1 billion business, and you didn't have that like we need in the state, you'd be fired.
Exactly, and I know you've also talked about tax incentives to keep incentives to keep people in Iowa. Is that your plan for specifically rural communities? How do we keep younger workers in those communities?
I think rural communities are very important, but this is a plan for the entire state. Look, we're competing against other states, and Iowa's an amazing place to be, and we have things that these kids that are leaving want. Like I said before, we're 4th highest in the country for net out-migration. It comes down to opportunity and what levers we have to pull as governor. Number one, I'm calling for a moratorium on economic development dollars to the large city centers in our state. People don't realize how little it would take to make a big difference in our rural communities. Number two, we need to be investing in Iowa's homegrown businesses and entrepreneurs, not global companies, and also not Chinese companies that we're propping up the Chinese government with some of our tax dollars. We need to be investing in companies that are grown here in Iowa, that will be here for 50, 60 years. The third thing I'd like to talk about is that I would like to set up an entrepreneurial fund within the state to help young people that have great ideas to start good businesses. And then lastly, what we need to talk about is how do we incentivize young people to come home? I think an income tax rebate to help them with down payments on a home, if you'll move home, if you've been trained in the trades or or have a remote work job, would be the first place to start.
Do you have a specific policy for rural areas? I mean, under that, we could continue to see people just move to the metro. Would that be fine for you as governor, or do you have something to address that?
Oh no, I think this is where the lever we pull is the most important. And on the state level, the Iowa Economic Development Authority is one of the biggest levers we can pull. Prioritizing those dollars and those incentives to rural communities. So when a company does want to come here, we're prioritizing a rural community. That might be close to a population center, but also we have a great asset for them, which is the workers that we have in our rural communities that will come to help them build their companies. Prioritizing our rural communities, I think, is the key to this.
Brad Sherman, what do you do to stop rural communities from shrinking in Iowa?
Well, it's already been mentioned about family farms. We have to rebuild our family farms again. The big corporate entities that are gobbling up family farms need to be looked at. We need to see if they are actually violating Chapter 9 of the Iowa Code, where it prevents big corporate entities from owning too much land. And this is an important thing. And then there are other big companies also that are involved in that even though their names are not on the title deed of these properties, they still control it. And so that's something we have to look at and decide. We have antitrust laws for these types of things. And I don't know that these things have ever been looked at in a long time. That's an important thing. And I think another thing that we need to do to keep people here comes to do with the whole life issue. In America, we've killed 70 or 80 million babies through abortion. Now Roe v. Wade has been overturned, and it's a big issue. So our population is decreased partly because of that. That's part of the equation. It's not the whole picture, but it's a part of the picture. So we need to encourage families, encourage this again, and when we rebuild our families and people begin cohesing together, it's going to help a lot.
Adam Steen, what's your plan?
Yeah, I've been traveling this state now for 9 months, and I've been talking about the skilled trades industry. When I talk about skilled trades, I talk about construction trades, I talk about healthcare trades, I talk about agriculture trades. And at the end of the day, we need more public-private partnerships. We need young kids in 6th, 7th, 8th grade more involved in vocational studies, industrial arts, so that they realize when they leave high school, they don't have to go to a 4-year university and hopefully don't come out as a communist with hundreds of thousands of dollars in student loan debt. They can get a job right in their backyard. They can make $60,000 a year with no debt whatsoever, and the American dream can be achievable. We need those public-private partnerships, and we need focus on local control. We need local communities to make these decisions, because locals know where the opportunities are. Let me give you one example. I was in Estherville, Iowa at the Iowa Lakes Aviation Institute. They said we need 26 or 24 more students so that we can get this federal grant. And I said, have you talked to the homeschoolers that are out there? They didn't know the homeschool program existed. We made the connections. Now Iowa Lakes Aviation Institute has an opportunity to bring homeschoolers in to be pilots and take care of a global pilot shortage that's coming our way.
We're going to move on.
The Iowa Business Council is among the business organizations that has talked about the need for immigrants to be part of our workforce in this state. As you all know, we have dealt with a workforce shortage in key areas for a number of years here. We want to focus on just one aspect of this, and that would be legal temporary foreign workers. As we know, they are used in agriculture, healthcare, business, education, among others. Eddie Andrews, since you stay as our leadoff hitter here, do you support people working in Iowa with some kind of temporary legal status to work here?
Now, with that, just that before I answer, is that different than what we have now? Are you seeing a new program?
You're the gov, you can do whatever you want.
No. I want to understand what your question is.
Sure. We're looking, we've seen what's going on with deportation, so I don't want to get into that aspect of it. I think you all have been supportive of deporting people who have committed crimes in this country. We're talking about some of our industries in this country rely on temporary foreign workers to fill some of those gaps, whether it's healthcare, ag, education, business, what have you. Do you support us continuing to do that? Some of that's changed on the federal level, but do you support us keep doing that, or do you have other ideas in
Okay.
mind?
So as a person here who's co-pastor to Hispanic Church, who's worked with the Congolese community, a number of communities who are here, both from their international relations and other areas, I've actually helped people get legal immigration status. If you're talking about like foreign education visas or things like that, I think I'm not sure that's the way to go, because there are plenty of jobs here. I talked to a young lady who's like 20 years old, literally 150 applications she put in, and she's just looking for a reasonable wage. And so I think we do need to prioritize Iowans and Americans here. And as people come and are welcoming and assimilated into our society and become Americans second.
Zach Lane, you have a commercial up about this topic in partial, but you in the ad talk about H-1B visas, and you don't want that part of the university setting. As you know, in education and healthcare, community leaders say those are vital. So why would you change that?
Well, I think first, what we have to understand is that we're a welcoming country. We have been a welcoming country. The United States of America has done more to welcome people than I think any other country in the world. But the issue is that many of these programs have been abused for far too long, and the left has abused them on purpose for a very long time. Right now, the H-1B program is one of the most abused immigration programs that we have. I'm calling to completely end H-1B hiring in our state universities and our state government. As a matter of fact, if you want a state contract with the state of Iowa, it's going to be given as part of the ranking as how many Iowans you're hiring. And it's going to be inversely correlated to how many H-1Bs you have. The reason is Iowa people will do these jobs. I reject the idea that our people won't do these jobs. We have some of the most hardworking kids in the country. You go to any other state and you graduate from Iowa high school or Iowa college, you give them a resume, it says you're from Iowa. What do they say? We love hiring Iowans. I want to be hiring those Iowans here. It's why we need to bring our kids back home, and that's what I'm going to be fighting for as governor.
Brad Sherman, do you agree? Should we cut that off?
Well, when migrant workers have been part of our history for a long, long time, as long as it's legal and they're tracked, there's a place for it. But I agree also with what Zach said. You know, we have to really cut the corruption down from these things like H-1B and what have you. I've done some study on that, and that is a huge problem. That's part of what happens in Minnesota. We've got, you know, the corruption we saw up there. And I think we're a little naive to think none of that is happening in Iowa. I don't think we're as bad as Minnesota, but we have to get some transparency and looking into that to make sure we fix that. And so I know there are some farms that are doing, I know of one farm that's doing almost 50,000 acres of organic farming. And so they have to have a lot of manual labor to take care of their crops and what have you. So, you know, you can't cut it off right away, but I'm all for growing our population, getting our people working. And that's, I think, when we do that, you know, we're going to see Iowa thrive.
Adam Steen, how do you balance our workforce needs with some of these ideas about maybe not allowing at least as many foreign-born workers in here?
Yeah. Well, first of all, we need to be America first. We need to be Iowa first. And I appreciate what President Trump is doing right here all across the country. I think for the first time in a long time, we have a president that legitimately cares about America. He legitimately cares about people. And right now, I appreciate what he's doing. If you are here illegally, you self-report, you leave, you come back legally, you get your job, and then you pay taxes and you join the society that we're in. And I would support that. And I want to make sure that everyone is very clear. In a Steen administration, it will be law and order, and we will follow what President Trump is doing from a legal perspective. In a Rob Sand administration, if Rob Sand is the governor of the state of Iowa, he supported the hiring of criminal illegal alien Ian Roberts. He supported him coming in and overseeing the largest school district in the state of Iowa. That is egregious. that puts our families and our children at risk. And esteemed administration, it will be law, it will be order, and we'll make sure those that are here illegally have an opportunity to come back if they're not a criminal, so that we can grow our economy across the state.
But we're specifically talking about temporary legal status for foreign-born workers. How does that fit in?
If they self-report and they're here legally, and we know that, and we are tracking them, and they're paying taxes, I'm all for it.
Okay. All right, we're going to take a break here. Obviously, a lot more to get to as we come up. Cancer, water quality, a lot of things to discuss.
Yeah, public health in general. We're going to ask each candidate where they stand on some of the top concerns for Iowans. We'll be right back after this break.
Keep going. Give us more of the.
You're watching KCCI Commitment 2026, Iowa Governor Republican Primary Debate.
And welcome back to the Iowa Republican primary debate here in the KCCI studios in downtown Des Moines. We want to focus on a topic that I know all of you gentlemen hear about a lot, and that would be this rising cancer rate that we've been dealing with that's already come up so far during this conversation.
Yeah, our state has one of the highest cancer rates in the country. Now, you all have addressed this in previous ways. You all have called for the need for independent research. So moving beyond that, if you're governor, Eddie Andrews, what would you do in your first 100 days to address this before any new research can be done?
Well, before new research, hopefully that will also include pediatric research, which I've been fighting for, as you know. There are a couple things. We can address screening. We can address radon, providing reduced or a means-tested way to provide radon kits in every home, every apartment home. And when I talk about screening, obviously being number 2 in cancer is absolutely a phenomenal issue that we must fix. We have to fix that. While free screenings or supplemented screenings can't solve the cancer, it can certainly detect it earlier and minimize those. So in the state legislature, we've been working on some of those solutions right now. But you have, before you start spending tens of millions of dollars, you have to have adequate research. And that's been my first passion of actually getting the correct data in front of us.
Zach Lane, you're a governor, let's say your first 100 days, what's the first concrete step that you take on addressing Iowa's cancer crisis?
First, I think we need to just tell the truth about what's going on here, and that we are not just number 2 in cancer in the country, we are the fastest rate of new cancer ever recorded in history. That's not hyperbole. 212 jurisdictions counted. We are rising faster than any other ever have. So there's a couple things. Independent research is important because federal agencies have been captured for a very long time, and the people that are being regulated are the ones actually providing some of the science, a lot of the science. Number 2, no immunity. No company should ever have immunity from liability. I would veto any pesticide immunity bill that would come up. We have to be willing to address that a lot of this is coming because we've been lied to for a very long time by big agricultural companies. And our farmers are also getting sick. Kids in rural areas have 36% higher cancer rates in the state of Iowa. We need to solve this alongside our farmers, not on their backs. We need to work with them to help make them healthier and help solve the cancer crisis, which is coming from many different areas. Agriculture is just one.
Now, when you say tell the truth, I mean, are you holding forums as governor? Are you putting ads up on TV? Or are you just saying when questions, come up, you answer them with that platform?
I think this is one of the biggest voices you can have in the state right here. And I've been talking about this on the campaign since we launched. There are special interests that have been protecting their bottom line and large corporations that have been refusing to take responsibility for the safety of their products. And we have to tell the truth so we can talk to the people about what's going on, because they know what's going on. You go to any community, they know why we have an outlier cancer rate. But where politicians have not been talking about the real issues for far too long, and as governor, truth will be number one.
Brad Sherman, if you were governor, if you organized a task force of independent researchers, before that comes back, what's the first action you would take on this?
Well, recently we talked with the American Cancer Society, and we asked them, what was going on with the whole cancer rates, and all they could mention, the people that we talked to, all they could mention was smoking and radon. It didn't bring up anything else. Now that's very suspicious to me. We have to have research. Now you mentioned the first 100 days. I'm planning on working on that before first 100 days. I want to get a team in place who can do the kind of research. I was the first guy in this race, and I was the first one talking about independent research. Somebody that does not have a dog in the hunt, as they say. And so we have to have, because there's a serious level of mistrust in our public toward the medical establishment. And so we have to get the kind of research that's done by totally independent people that have no conflict of interest. Once we have that data, then it'll be pretty easy to know what to do. Now there are some things we can already do. Like we can help provide radon test kits. That hasn't gotten much attention. It needs more attention. But that's just one form of cancer, for lung cancer. So that's my minute is up. So
can I just add? He's not the only one talking about independent research. So
we said you all have called for that. Adam Steen, besides the independent research, what would you do?
Yeah, well, as I've mentioned many times, this topic is very near and dear to my heart. This July, it will be 4 years since my dad passed away of cancer. My mom is a breast cancer survivor. And I don't need to wait 100 days. I worked within government for long enough to know that the first thing I'm going to do on day one is set up a specific enterprise within the Department of Administrative Services to tackle this issue and to stop cancer in its tracks. DAS became known as a special projects problem solver with inside of state government. We tackled some of the largest projects the state has ever tried to complete. We did it successfully. We did it on time. We did it under budget. So I'll do that on day one. Then we will bring in the private and public sector to make sure that we have smart people at the table giving us real answers so that we can come up with real solutions. And then we're going to fund it. We're going to fund it appropriately so that those solutions that are at the table can be funded. We can actually get them solved. This will be Iowa's moon mission. This is going to take time. This is going to take a lot of time, a lot of effort, a lot of energy, but we are Iowans. And when we solve this problem, other states are going to ask us how we did it.
Adam, when you say you're going to fund it appropriately, can you give me a number of what you'd commit annually as a state?
So right now, from a funding perspective, Texas funds cancer research at $300 million a year. Iowa is now increasing its cancer funding right now. So we need to be somewhere above the $1 million that we were spending. But just throwing out a number, I don't want to do that, but it needs to be above $1 million, and it needs to be somewhere in the range of less than $300 million, because we here in Iowa, we can do it with public-private partnerships.
As you all know, it's not just one thing causing all of this. So specifically, do you believe that there are environmental conditions working that are causing some of this? And some of these are very multifaceted. But do you believe that that is happening, and what do you do about that?
Well, I think so. I mean, I think it's pretty clear. Most of us kind of automatically assume with all the chemicals. But one of the things that came back from the initial result, which was surprising, is that farmers have a lower rate of cancer, which was a little surprising. And so we're still digging into that. Now, I had the pleasure, and I say interesting pleasure, of introducing a young lady, Marie Post, 10 years old, who was a pediatric cancer advocate for her brother Troy, twin brother, I believe. And when I introduced her at the State House, I was torn because I was so proud of this young lady, but we as adults have to get to the root of this so she can get back to playing with dolls in recess. And so all of this has to, we understand we cannot have liability protection for the people who are possibly causing glyphosate-based cancer. So.
Zach Lane, you've talked about some of that as well, especially with glyphosate. If you believe that there are environmental conditions here at play causing this, how do you stop that and how do you protect people from that exposure?
Well, there's absolutely environmental conditions at play. Absolutely. I mean, Iowa's an outlier in this entire situation. The question is, why are we an outlier? You know, people talk a lot about radon. Radon was deposited in Iowa from glaciers. Mitigation has only gotten better. But we look at other things that we're seeing, things like high nitrate load in water. High nitrates are one of the top causes of colorectal cancer. And colon cancer is one of the fastest killing cancers. And the same thing with non-Hodgkin's lymphoma. You can also find that there are many products that are used in agricultural settings that even cause melanoma. Look, we know these are environmental in nature, but I would want to just mention one thing. That report that came out that said farmers have lower instances of cancer, that's not actually what it says. What it says is they have lower total cancer, and what that's attributed to, per the report, is a healthy lifestyle factor. When you look at the specific cancers that are caused by these products, they are actually much higher in their cancer rate. We have to do this because for a long time, large companies have been lying to our farmers about the safety of their products, and we need to get truth on our side.
So Brad Sherman, if you believe that there are more causes than, smoking, drinking too much, not having, having a sedentary lifestyle, not eating right, those kind of things, if there are some other environmental factors at play here, how do you address that as governor?
Well, I have this phrase running through my mind, and it's always there, and it's, if we heal our soil, we will heal Iowa. And so I've visited some farms that are doing regenerative farming, organic farming, et cetera. And with one experiment I saw was absolutely eye-opening. The structure of healthy soil holds water, it doesn't let it run off, it prevents flooding, prevents erosion, it takes care of nitrates because it sits there and it gets absorbed naturally. There's just a whole range of benefits that come from a healthy soil. The food that gets grown there doesn't have to have the chemicals. Compare that to the soil that's scorched by just continual row cropping, and the soil just has no structure, and that's a big problem that we have to deal with. Now, when I was in the House, I had a lobbyist come to me and said, about getting immunity for the chemical companies, and I said, save your breath, buddy, I'm not voting for this one. Nobody gets immunity. And then the other thing, of course, that we have to do is, when we come to the chemicals, I know one chemist who literally said glyphosate also has formaldehyde in it, could be removed easily, but that formaldehyde we know is a cause of cancer.
Thank you. Adam Steen.
Yeah. I don't lay this all on the backs of farmers. I mean, I spent a lot of time researching, talking to people that are a lot smarter than me. My wife sits on the board at Unity Point Health in Des Moines. She's the former chair of the board of John Stoddard Cancer. We're not a family that just sits back and says things for political purposes. What we do is we solve problems. And so I went out and I talked to the Iowa Cancer Consortium. I talked to doctors here in Des Moines that are medical researchers. They will not vote for me. They will not donate to me. But I wanted to know from their perspective what we need to do. We have radon issues. We have smoking issues. We spend too much time inside. We eat too much processed foods. We don't live a healthy lifestyle across the board. And so what we need to do within the enterprise that I'm going to create inside of DAS is bring out the facts, bring out the truth, and create a strategic plan that's going to attack these issues so that we can create healthy lifestyles here in Iowa and we can stop cancer in its tracks. The other thing we're going to do is we're going to fund private well testing. Private wells all across the state need to be tested because that's one area that we're not talking about that we need to.
Well, I know we have talked about environmental conditions and also about water quality. We want to get to that issue as well. We just saw that the state committed more than $300 million over 12 years to trying to improve water quality. However, most of that is dealing with water that is already contaminated. So, Eddie Andrews, what do you do to try to treat and stop pollutants from getting into Iowa's water sources in the first place? And does that require regulation at the state level?
Oh, I think it does require some amount of regulation and direction from the state. I would just add that towards the very end of our session, I think you were there, we did, as a state legislature, begin that whole process of adding additional funds, a lot of funding for water quality issues, for measurement, for supporting IDOLs better, for all these different programs. And so we're already started. And I would say, just because this is a Republican primary, I would just like to add that many of the things that we proposed, even in the Iowa legislature, things that were on, that's something that should be a bipartisan issue, the Republicans did all this, and I think almost every Democrat voted against it. And so I think that's very telling that Republicans have actually been leading on this issue, which in many cases people think is a more of a left-leaning issue. So I would continue to do that and pour on the gas.
Zach, when it comes to stopping pollutants from getting into Iowa's waterways and drinking water sources, how do you do that, and what would enforcement look like at the state level?
Well, number one, I would just say that clean water is at the top of the list of things Iowans should just be able to count on. Clean water, safe communities, good schools. A lot of my campaign is about things Iowans should just be able to count on. And so when we look at the water quality issues, to answer your question directly, we know how to stop it. You know, right now, up near Bear Creek in Ames, Iowa State did a experiment where they used saturated buffers to tie into tile lines coming off of farms. And when they did that, they removed 100% of the nitrate load that was coming off of there. The other thing we can do is start to incentivize different types of nitrogen application for our farmers. Refundable tax credits, I'm calling for deep banding or knifing in nitrogen. Farmers do not want to lose their inputs. And right now we're losing 30 to 50%. So by providing refundable tax credits, they'll put it on cost parity, we're actually able to save them money, help them have higher profit margins on their farms, live healthier lives, because they're drinking the water too. We have ways we can solve this. The answer is to come together to do it. It's not a left or right issue. We cannot allow this to be a partisan issue.
Brad Sherman, what do you think about all this?
Well, I already mentioned the healthy soil in the last question. I think that's, again, one of the biggest things we can do for water quality. We need the water not to run off. We need the natural result of getting rid of those nitrates. Now, when I was in the State House, I brought in the state geologist to our committee, Natural Resources Committee, and that initiated discussion, which ultimately, I think in this past session, ended up in money being allocated to map our water tables, map our aquifers in our state. There was no mapping done. So we have to understand that's a big thing too for our drinking water. Now I know that's because even our aquifers are getting contaminated at times. So we have to map it, we have to test it, and then find out where that's coming from. So this is a big issue as well when it comes to water quality. But I just can't emphasize the importance enough of getting back to healthy soil. And there are lots of steps we can take in between. Biofilters, the ponds that people are building to hold water so it doesn't run off so quickly, et cetera. So these are all important steps that we can take, and we have to use every resource we have.
On that healthy soils plan that you have, is that something that you would require at a state level, or would it be voluntary or incentivized?
Well, I don't think you can require that. You can. I'd rather see it done voluntary. I think that's the first step, is ask people to educate people. It's always about education. I think our Iowans want to do the right thing. Nobody's guilty here. We just have to educate people, do the research that finds the answers to these problems, and then pass that information along, and people will do the right thing.
Adam Steen, when it comes to stopping pollutants from getting into Iowa's waterways, what would your plan be as governor?
Yeah, well, there are three immediate things that we can do that we're doing right now, and it's actually working. One is buffer strips, two is cover crops, and three is looking at adjusting the timing of phosphates onto our soils. That's actually working. It's running through IDOLS right now, so I see no reason why we wouldn't continue to work with that program, because farmers are doing what they can. What I feel from an Iowan perspective, having been an Iowan my entire life, having been an innovator my entire life, is I believe that as we do the buffer strips to cover crops and look at timing of phosphates, we need to look at government regulation and see what is getting in front of innovation here in the state of Iowa. There are innovators right now that have different products, different services that they can use that's going to bolster the ability to keep nitrates out of our water. And when you combine that with what's already working, we're going to solve the issue, and we can move on to bigger and better things.
That transitions into the next phase of this, and big picture, as you look at all of this, you have some people who want this all done primarily on a voluntary basis. Some people think that more regulation would be required to force this to happen more quickly. Eddie Andrews, if we could start with you. Can you explain to people, and maybe this is more of a philosophical question, but where does regulation come into this, or do you just lean into people's civic responsibility that they want to do this voluntarily because you share the vision with them?
Well, I think Iowans want to do the right things. I met 2 days ago at 6:15 in the morning, a farmers meeting at a Casey's, and this topic came up. And one of the farmers just said, you know what, we're all in this. Why don't we just continue these kinds of conversations? Now, me personally, as a traditional conservative Republican, no, I don't believe in essential mandates, unnecessary mandates. But I think most people, once you have this conversation and you talk about regenerative farming, you talk about buffering, you talk about solutions that actually work, people want to do this. I mean, we're all in this together. We want a healthier environment. And so everyone is on board. That's what I've seen as we educate and continue to work together.
But if everybody wants to do it, why aren't they already doing it?
Well, I think leadership and education. I mean, we are still working on, if you listen to Secretary Mike Naig, I mean, we started the nutrient reduction program. It is, I would say, working. It takes time, but we have tons more to do.
Zach Lane, part of what the legislature passed in those wee early hours in that marathon weekend when they wrapped things up was, I believe, $25 million for Central Iowa Water Works for nitrate removal over the next 3 years. Doesn't that show that voluntary efforts do not work well enough if they're having to pull so much nitrate out?
Well, I think that number one, that's a Band-Aid solution for the problem that we have. You know, as one of the ways I'm going to judge success as governor is that we don't have to upgrade those systems anymore. I just toured the system this week. Let me say this, it doesn't have to be as much about regulation as I think incentives. Iowans do want to do the right things. Farmers are on break-even margins right now, so they can experiment with different ways to solve this problem, even though they want to do that. And look, this is a way bigger issue than we think about. I often talk about the issue of kids leaving the state and the issue of the cancer crisis. Look, I've said very, very clearly, you know, I'm all for low taxes, low regulation, but if our kids are leaving and our people are getting cancer, we're not winning. That's not a winning scenario in our state. So I actually believe that once we start to solve these issues, even with state incentives, that we're gonna see more people wanna stay in our state and live in our state, and we're gonna see increased revenues to our government. This is a pro-life issue for the people of Iowa, and it's something that we can solve along with farmers and people in urban communities that are part of what's going on as well.
I want to make sure I understand what you're saying properly. The $25 million they allocated, they should not have done that?
No, I'm saying that that's an indication that we are going the wrong direction still. Meaning, if we were reducing the amount of nitrate load in our water, we wouldn't need to continually upgrade our system. I was just talking to them about this at Des Moines Water Works this week. And so I think the evidence that we're moving in the right direction is that we never have to upgrade that system again. And that would be my goal as governor, is to decrease the nitrate load in the water in the future so we have less stress on that system.
Brad Sherman, so how do you balance what should be voluntary, what if anything more should be mandatory?
Well, you know, here we are in our 250th year of this nation, and right in our Declaration of Independence, it says, we hold these truths to be self-evident, that all men are created equal, and they're endowed by their Creator with certain unalienable rights that are life, liberty, pursuit of happiness. Now, this is a life issue. And it goes on and says, and to secure these rights, governments are instituted among men. It is the job of government to protect life. That is one of government's primary jobs, according to this nation and our birth certificate. So yes, government has to get involved. Now, we can do lots of different things to educate people and make it voluntary, but when lives are being threatened, government has to step in. So I think there's a balance there that we have to find. We don't want to force people, but there is a place for government to step in and regulate and say we have to protect life.
Adam Steen, how do you define that balance?
Yeah, by and large, I hate government regulation. I think the government has usurped its authority and it jumps into areas that it shouldn't jump into. It spends money where it shouldn't spend money. I believe in our farmers. I believe in Iowans. I believe they're doing what they're called to do. And I believe that they're doing everything they can do to protect their families and the families across Iowa. I mean, we feed the world. That's who we are as Iowans. We're not going to back down from that. I believe that if we overregulate, we're going to be just like Rob Sand. Can you imagine, Iowa, if Rob Sand is your governor and the regulation that he's going to put on through every single department across this state, including the DNR? You're not going to be able to get any work done because the Democrats and Rob Sand believe that the government knows what to do. The government does not know what to do. I've been inside the belly of the beast. I know the government doesn't know what to do. We need the private sector to continue to innovate, to continue to create, and continue to create opportunities for Iowans to remain safe and to solve the problems that we've got right now.
Where are Iowa companies hamstrung on the regulations to improve this?
So right now, through the DNR, there are antiquated rules right now that don't allow proper testing for innovation up in Northwest Iowa right now. There's products and services that Iowa farmers can use right now that would spot check where nitrates are being put on too much or too little within their fields. DNR regulation does not allow that product and that service to exist, and we need to get rid of those regulations.
Well, we do want to get to more topics, continue talking about public health. We'll be right back after this short break.
You're watching KCCI Commitment 2026, Iowa Governor Republican Primary Debate.
Welcome back to our primary debate, our final half hour. We're going to squeeze in as much as we can here, gents.
And we want to talk about the issue of eminent domain. It's one that you all have addressed pretty frequently in this primary race. I believe that you all have called for banning the use of eminent domain for carbon capture pipelines. However, the ethanol industry says if that pipelines did not go through, they would struggle to stay competitive. About 60% of Iowa corn goes to ethanol. Eddie Andrews, how do you think about the balance between protecting property rights and not hamstringing that industry from being competitive?
Well, even if you think that corn prices are going to rise through the roof, if you think this carbon capture pipeline is the best thing since sliced bread, it still does not allow you to take someone's private property. And let me just say, under no circumstances is there a compromise possible. All this talk about getting together and let's singing Kumbaya and talking about this, time's over for that. You cannot. Two things will happen. You either take somebody's land against their will, or we stop you from taking their land against the will. And it goes right to what Brad mentioned. He quoted, life, liberty, pursuit of happiness, which includes property, and it's government's job to protect your property. And so on day one, that will end under Eddie Andrews' administration.
Zach Lane, how do you balance protecting property rights and Iowa's biofuels industry?
A lot of my campaign's been about preserving Iowa's culture. And, I think when I talk to people about this, I often talk about why our ancestors came to the state in the first place. They largely had religious freedom where they were in Europe. What they didn't have was the ability to own the ground under their feet. They came here not to become capitalists, but to own that ground, build their churches in their communities, and pass something on to their kids. And I think eminent domain for a private company is an affront to that. We cannot allow that to happen in our state. I would veto any bill that would allow it to happen. Now, we do build pipelines, hundreds of miles of pipelines, thousands of miles. We know how to build pipelines safely. But the issue is that you need to be able to go and get voluntary easements to do that project and not take away the ground that has been in some of these families for 150 years. This is a key part of our culture, and as governor, I would promote and protect the private property rights of citizens, while also saying that we have ways to do these projects that are not on the backs or against what we're doing with our foundational rights.
Brad Sherman, the renewable fuels industry has looked at bills in the Iowa House that have banned the use of eminent domain for carbon capture pipelines and said it would kill their project. I mean, do you refute, that's what would happen if a bill like that were to become law?
Well, the opinions are split on whether it would raise corn prices or not. That's a different issue. But I can tell you this, a private company who's not a common carrier for a product that's not a public utility should never ever get to use eminent domain. It's just that simple. But as I like to joke, and I've done many times on the campaign trail, some things are so simple you need a lawyer to misunderstand it. And so that's what's going on here. So there is no balance on this issue that needs to be struck. It shouldn't happen. You know, it's private property, and we have to protect private property rights. That's one of the foundations of this nation. We have to protect people's private property rights. And and the pipeline, it's not just another pipeline. It's an extremely dangerous pipeline. Pipelines have always had risk for rupture. The CO2 pipelines are much, much higher pressure. They're up to 25 to 3,000 pounds per square inch. Sometimes it's CO2 that can come out in a cloud, fill up a valley, and smother everything that breathes. So it's not just your average pipeline. An average pipeline could create an environmental issue, but this can extinguish life.
Adam Steen, how do you balance protecting property rights and also protecting Iowa's economy that is in large part connected to, corn and ethanol?
Yeah. So I've been hopefully very clear that eminent domain should not be used for carbon sequestration. And I actually very much supported Senator Lalonde's amendment to the eminent domain bill that went through the Senate this year, never hit the floor, that allowed for an open corridor, that allowed for different timing of negotiations. We need to let free enterprise reign, but we cannot allow eminent domain for carbon sequestrations. It's not an appropriate use. That said, Iowa, again, feeds the world, and ethanol is important for us. We will have year-round E15. And from a global perspective, Iowans, we need to understand that President Trump is working to create better trade deals across this entire globe for us. We need new trade deals with countries we don't have trade deals with already. And also we need new innovations, and that's where the public and private sector can come together, rise up, and create value where value doesn't exist before. But I think Iowans have grit. I think they've got hope, faith, determination. We will see our way through it, and we will have a burgeoning ethanol industry like we've always had.
Let's talk about healthcare now, obviously a very important topic in our state. We have seen the federal cuts from Congress that impact Medicare and Medicaid funding in the future. Since then, we have seen some healthcare clinics close across our state, Des Moines, Ottumwa, Centerville, just to name 3 of those. Providers have been saying that they cannot afford to keep going for a variety of reasons. Those low reimbursement rates, staffing shortages, you have population decline, all of those kind of things. A lot of factors, but the people who live in those communities then cannot access the service that people can get when they live in bigger metropolitan areas a lot of times. Eddie Andrews, if we can start with you here.
Sure.
What can you say to those folks who are seeing hospitals and clinics closing? Is there anything you can do as governor to help them get those services in the future?
In a word, yes. So one of the things that we've done over the last, was it last year or the year before, we, as a body that in the Capitol, we looked at one of our facilities that was closing in Southeast Iowa. And we removed the status as a hospital, but we kept the urgent care part of that. And so that's one way of just serving that community. Maybe they can't support a full functioning hospital, but they can support an urgent care. And I would like to see more of those spread around the state, not less. One of the things that we did have from the One Big Beautiful Bill and some of the other changes that came, we knew there were some changes coming from Medicaid and Medicare. I've been personally fighting for increasing the reimbursement rates. We've been successful on some of the mental health rates, but we need to do more.
All right, Zach Lane, what can you do to help these folks who are seeing these services disappear?
This is very personal to me. We live in a rural community. We use a small rural hospital. We love the small rural hospital in Marengo. It's a great example of a good one in the state of Iowa. But this is an underlying issue that's affecting many different things in our state, and it is that we're losing population. Des Moines Register just had an article about more deaths than births in our state. Rural communities are being hit the hardest here. The ultimate answer is we need to grow. We need to have more people in these communities so that we can have more people using these facilities to make them more viable. But that being said, we have a bigger issue here, and that is we've seen consolidation in the healthcare industry. Over 100 consolidations, 100 purchases have happened over the past 20 years, giving less choice to the Iowans that need these centers. And it comes to a place where we become a cell on a spreadsheet to them to say, is it profitable for us to be there? Are we making enough money to be there? And what I would say is that we need to make sure that we are using our antitrust laws to make sure that we are having local choice and people that care about the communities that they're within that will stay for the long haul.
That could be kind of a big picture, long, drawn out legal fight, though. Is there anything you can do to give people more immediate hope that you can somehow flip this around?
Yes, thank you for the 30 seconds. Here's what it would be for me. It's that we have to look at the levers we can pull. We've talked a lot about jobs in the state and getting people back here. When you talk about nursing, when you talk about skilled trades, you talk about those types of jobs, we have to start getting rid of these degrees in our colleges that don't matter, that aren't giving you something that you can actually get into and be employable. Nursing is one that we can get right into. Skilled trades is another one. And the reason we do this is not for a political buzzword. We do it because you're being trained to go deep into your community to serve your neighbors. And so I think that type of approach to prioritize having the right degrees and the right training is important.
Brad Sherman, you're also in a smaller community there in Williamsburg. What do you say to folks statewide looking at some of these services ending?
Yeah, I'm close to the same hospital Zach's talking about there in Marengo, and it's a pretty amazing facility when you get a chance to go in there and look at it. So, but again, it's the big picture. We have to grow our population, I think, and there's so many different facets to even doing that, getting our grid established in our rural communities where people want to live there and want to move there. When there's a population base, these people will go there. But there's also a lot of issues that have to do with exaggerated rates. I know of one man who started his own company. He was telling me that the insurance companies rate certain procedures. Like he told me about one procedure that cost $125,000. Well, he went and shopped around and got it for $20,000, and so, or $25,000. And so, these are some things that are jacking up prices so high that people just can't afford to live there. And so I just think there's this issue of simply caring for people. I know about this company. I know of another company right here in Iowa who have a whole new mentality when it comes to healthcare. They care about people. And so when the care for people surpasses the care for money, we're going to see some big changes in our healthcare industry. And so I think if we can expose some of that kind of fraud and waste that's going on in the healthcare industry, we're going to see some changes.
But what gets that care there quickly?
Well, I've talked about this a lot, but there's so many issues that we have to deal with. If we think we can fix what's going on in Iowa or this nation without God's help, we need it. We're due for another great awakening in this country. And so, a lot of this has to do with prayer, and asking people to consider, are you pleasing God or are you not pleasing God? So when you talk about caring for people, that's where it comes from, because God has the ultimate care for people.
Adam Steen, what can you do to restore some of these services that people have been, and I mentioned a lot of rural communities, but frankly, Southside Des Moines just lost one too, so that's the biggest city in the state. So what's going to stop this?
Yeah, there are two reasons that these clinics, these healthcare providers are leaving rural communities right now. The first one is they can't find the staff, and the second is they don't have the demand. And the function of that is there's too little industry in these areas. We've got to be recruiting new business into the state of Iowa to capitalize on the infrastructure that we have to create new industries in rural parts of Iowa so that people show up to work, and they need healthcare providers. That will bring healthcare providers back. Staff, we can get that through the trades industry, healthcare trades. I was in the Cedar Valley, and what the CAPS program is doing is they're certifying kids out of high school into their nursing degrees so that right out of high school they can get jobs right in the healthcare industry. So we need industry in the state of Iowa, all across rural Iowa. We can do that, we can grow that, because again, we're Iowans, that's what we do. We've got the infrastructure, we've got the workforce, and when we infiltrate our schools with skilled trades, with private sector, these kids at a young age are going to be able to find these jobs right out of school, and they'll be able to staff those healthcare entities, and they'll also have the demand there for it as well.
Let's get a little bit more specific about staffing, because Iowa has one of the worst patient-to-doctor ratios in the entire country. We also have the fewest OBGYNs per capita of any state, and Iowans are losing access to obstetrics care at a high rate as well. There's problems in rural areas, but there's also problems, as Dave brought up, in Des Moines here as well. So, Eddie Andrews, what does Iowa do to bring more doctors and nurses to our state and keep them here?
Great question. So, incentives, we mentioned these earlier. So you already know that one of my passions at the Capitol. When I came in, I was very focused on mental health. We needed more doctors. Well, how do we get them? Through incentives. And we started that program by expanding the residencies at the University of Iowa, the same we can do for OBGYNs, right? We also provided incentives. So to your point earlier, that people don't just, now that we have an expanded number of doctors, they don't take that first flight out to California once they are offered that job. And so that program is thriving right now. And those doctors are starting to stay here in Iowa, and we can do the same with our OBGYNs. It's the contrast of really regulation and mandates versus incentives. Iowans love incentives.
Talk to nurses. A lot of them will tell you they're experiencing burnout,
Yes.
you know, especially when you talk about mental health and the staff that are working in those types of facilities. They're bringing people in, but they're also losing them. I mean, is there something that you can do besides just bringing people, but also keeping them?
Yes, and I do talk to nurses. I mean, this is one of the conversations that I have all the time. It really, again, gets back to incentivizing people, finding out what makes them stay. What is their interest? And obviously pay is a part of it. We did pass a law that restructured how some of the agencies handle the nurses, because ultimately it's about those people who really want to stay, to really help Iowans, and we have to incentivize them.
Zach Lane, what do you do to keep more doctors and nurses in Iowa and bring them to the state as well?
Well, I think this goes back to the number one point of my campaign. Look, why do we have a shortage? We're losing our people. They're leaving. We're fourth highest in the country for net out migration. We're not only just losing our people, we're losing the people that we educate. And so this is about giving the incentives to stay here, because often we have what they really want. We have their families here, their traditions, their home, where they grew up. It's something that they love. But what we have to get back to is getting competitive as a state. So I've been very clear. Look, if you are going through a nursing school, well, number one, we should be helping our young people with tuition assistance any way we can. But number two is that providing an income tax abatement so that funds can go into an account that will help you with a down payment on a home, making Iowa the most competitive place to live for a young person. We have to get creative. You know, I spent a lot of my life in the private sector, building businesses, buying companies. You have to compete for people. And we have not been doing what we can do to compete on a grand scale for Iowans to stay in our state. That's why it's the number one point on my platform running for governor.
Brad Sherman, if you were governor, what would you do to solve the staffing shortages in hospitals with doctors and nurses?
Well, one of the things I've seen, and my own son-in-law experienced this, is he saw a threat to his job and to his medical license. He's a physician, and he saw a threat to his medical license because he didn't believe in complying with the top-down protocols that were coming from Anthony Fauci from the national level. You know, and so he had to stand his ground, and thankfully he got an exemption. But when doctors are threatened with a board of medicine that tells them this is how you're going to practice medicine, and when they know it's not the best way to practice medicine, who wants to practice medicine in that environment? Now, that's not the whole issue, but that is a big issue. You know, I know people in the medical profession, him and a couple other people, who have quit their jobs because they saw doctors choosing very risky procedures because they could make more money over simple procedures that were cheaper. So these are some issues. A certificate of need is something else that we could do away with, which would open up more opportunities for people in rural areas and other places as well.
Adam Steen, what would be your plan to bring more doctors and nurses to Iowa and keep them here?
Yeah, I alluded to this in my last answer, but we need new business, new industry in rural parts of Iowa. That's what's going to grow rural Iowa. That's going to create new opportunity, new resources, new demand for other services all across the state. So we need to be recruiting businesses. We need to be going into these blue states that are being decimated by liberal woke policy. Again, Rob Sand comes in, we're going to be just like those other blue states. We got to hold our ground, keep Iowa conservative, and go into those states and recruit manufacturing. Recruit that business and industry into the state of Iowa so we can bolster our rural environment. We need to deregulate wherever we can so that our professionals have the ability to actually practice. And when we do that, we then start promoting Iowa as the awesome place it is to live. Again, traveling around this state for the last 9 months, I've seen parts of Iowa I didn't know existed. Iowa is awesome. People want to be here. They want to live here. We will provide them in a Steen administration business growth and industry all across Iowa so they can get jobs right here and stay in the awesome state that we live in.
My mother-in-law is a retired teacher, and she would probably scold me for saving education to this point
Sorry to Dave's
in the debate.
mother-in-law.
But every topic is important. So let's please talk about education. As you know, back in the day, Iowa was considered number one in the nation in education, right? We are no longer that way. Since Republicans have had the trifecta, they have prioritized additional money through the educational savings accounts for private schools. There have been charter school expansion, some other efforts to help on the homeschooling side. Our question now and our focus is, okay, now what's next? So what can get us to the point where people across the country look at Iowa as the best place in the country to get an education? Eddie Andrews.
Okay. Getting Iowa back to education, number one, is, excuse me, let me just rephrase that. Getting Iowa education back to number one is my number one priority. You know, I took a list of all the things that we used to do when Iowa led the nation. I called that the Iowa model. When I was a young kid, I would visit my grandparents and spend summers, and everyone in Ohio, where my grandparents lived, knew that we were the smartest kids in the world because we came from Iowa. It wasn't just about corn and soybeans, it was about education that we were known for. And prior to the ESAs and prior to all of those things, Iowa in the 90s lost that and started adopting the national programs, No Child Left Behind, ESSA, as well as Common Core. Simply put, I will refocus our efforts listening to teachers, backing teachers, and empowering parents, and getting Iowa back to number one by restoring the Iowa model.
And then as a follow-up, talk specifically about public education. For those who look at the way the legislature has funded education in a handful of the most recent years, it has been funded below the increase in inflation. Will you continue that practice going forward?
Again, zero-based budgeting, but we hear that from the other side of the aisle, that you're simultaneously spending too much and not enough on everything and on every single issue, and so you have to take that issue one by one. By the way, the state still spends $8,100 on that public student as the same as an ESA student. So we're not talking about spending any extra money, whether it's an ESA-based student or a traditional public school student.
Zach Lane, part of your professional career includes building a school in Kansas before you moved back here. For Iowa, what is the what's next in education for your administration?
Well, just quickly to talk about what you just asked, Eddie. When we were number one in the nation in education in the 1990s, we've now fallen to maybe number 26 or 27. And that's while we've increased per pupil spending by 200%. And this is all before ESAs even existed. We don't have the spending problem, we have a quality problem. So we wouldn't continue to fund something at a higher level if the quality is decreasing. We have to solve the quality problem. ESAs are foundational. Parents should have more say over where their kids go to school and more say over where their tax dollars are spent. But the governor of Iowa must be the number one advocate for public school kids in the state. To do that, first starting off of the experience I've had starting schools. Number one, the governor can create innovation zones in education. Cut the bureaucracy, cut the red tape, allow teachers that want to innovate, which many of them do. We're losing our young teachers. They've been there for 1, 2, or 3 years at a rate that's unacceptable. They want to innovate, they want to meet the needs of the students. But number two is that we have to allow them the freedom to meet the needs of the student, because education is not a one-size-fits-all program.
What stops them from being innovative, though? Is it state regulations, federal? What's stopping them?
Both. There's both state and federal regulations, ones that we can, but through the innovation zones we can create, we can actually cut a lot of that red tape. So oftentimes in the schools we started, I would have a public school teacher come to me and we would train them on what we were doing. The problem was when they go back into the classroom, they couldn't implement any of it because they're teaching to tests versus mastery-based learning, which is where we should be going with education, because it doesn't work to have a one-size-fits-all model. Our education system largely hasn't changed in 120 years. There's innovative models out there that are doing unbelievable things that have simple principles like this. A 7-year-old boy shouldn't be in a desk for 6 hours a day, and then when they can't sit still, have them medicated. We can solve these problems.
Brad Sherman, what's next in education? How do you get us to best in the country?
Well, my opening statement, I mentioned foundations of freedom. You know, free people are the ones that change things. Free people are the ones that innovate. Free people can do things like this. And Thomas Jefferson made it very clear that if we think people are not capable of exercising their control with a wholesome discretion, the remedy is not to take that power away from them, but to inform their discretion by education. So education and making people free is absolutely important. We have to fund education, but it can't be done one size fits all. It's already been mentioned. You know, some schools, I've heard stories of one superintendent making $400,000 a year, another one had a $400 a month clothing budget. When we get back to transparency on the local level, the local people are going to vote for the school board members that are doing the right thing. You know, one size fits all out of Des Moines usually doesn't work. It'll help some and hurt others. And so certain things we have to do from a state level. You know, I think we may have to start looking at the curriculum because the curriculum we're teaching needs to be upgraded. But we really have to push it to the local level and get the transparency on the local level.
Well, why isn't that? Shouldn't the school board be involved in what the curriculum is?
Well, they should be, but just look at the results we've had over the last years. You know, we've seen a continual decrease in test scores for years now. And you look at some of the curriculum, you know, the curriculum that's talking about, you know, transgender issues and things like that, that has no place in our public schools. You know, we're there to teach kids the skills to live a successful life. You know, and when those kind of curriculums are there, then somebody has to step in and say, no, we're not going to have that curriculum. We're going to get back to the founding principles that this nation was on: patriotism, reading, writing, and arithmetic. Get back to common sense in our educational systems.
All right, Adam Steen, for education, where do you take us next?
Yeah, I've said far and wide that the school choice legislation, the ESA program, is one of the best pieces of legislation that the state of Iowa passed. So much so that other states are replicating that legislation in their own states. There are two candidates in this race that are taking more of an approach of China, of a communist approach. One of those candidates is Randy Feenstra. He wants the government to be involved in your decisions as a private, independent, or Christian school. He wants the government to tell you who you can accept and who you can't accept. Rob Sand is the other one. Those two don't see, from a conservative perspective, what needs to continue to happen here in the state of Iowa. Those two cannot be your governor. Otherwise, school choice will not exist anymore in the state of Iowa. From a public school perspective, we love our public schools. My two boys go to public school. What we hate are the ridiculous requirements and standards that are being forced upon teachers that do not allow them to teach. It's running teachers out of these classes. It's not allowing teachers to create the culture they need in their classroom. What I will do as governor is provide a pathway for classical education in our public schools so that teachers can teach and kids can learn.
All right, we are running short on time, but we can't end here without talking about electability. So it's got to be in 2 sentences or less, but there are a lot of election analysts looking at this race in November and saying it's going to be competitive. So Eddie Andrews, why are you the most electable candidate out of this bunch?
I have added single-handedly more Republican voters in my district, legislative district, than any other district in Iowa. Those are receipts. I mentioned earlier, I am the most visited legislator at the Iowa House. That tells you that people want to hear from me and they know they can get solutions.
Long 2 sentences, but we'll take it. Zach Lane, 2 sentences. Why are you the most electable?
It's about the issues we're running on. You know, we have 4 issues. Whether you're left or right, you don't want Iowa's kids living in Iowa. You don't want our family farms dying off. You don't want our public education system in the bottom half. And you definitely don't want your friends, family, and neighbor dying from cancer. These are Iowa issues, and that's what I'm running on.
Brad Sherman, why are you the strongest candidate to beat Rob Sand in November?
Well, I was the first one to get into this race. I'm the only one that got in this race when the incumbent was still planning to run. I proved that I would stand up against the establishment. There are a lot of voters out there who are frustrated with the establishment, and I'm the one that can show them that I am, and I've proven that I will stand up against the establishment. That's how we keep them engaged. That's how we beat Rob Sand.
Adam Steen, why are you Republicans' best pick?
Yeah. I'm the only candidate that's already gone toe-to-toe with Rob Sand. I'm the only candidate that's been in the boardroom with him already, and I'm the only candidate that can beat him because I've got the facts.
All right.
He knows what I know.
Now we are going to give you some more time, though, I promise, for these closing statements. Eddie Andrews, you get 60 seconds for your closing statement.
First, let me just say it's not the only guy that's gone toe-to-toe with Rob Sand. Okay. First of all, thank you so very much for being here. Look, guys, this is a very serious election, and I would urge our Republican voters to look at June 2nd through the eyes of November. To your point, who's most electable? If not, we're going to end up like Kansas. Very rural state, super red majority in both chambers of the House, but they, in my opinion, nominated the wrong person who had zero appeal outside of the Republican base. Ended up with a Democrat governor who just vetoed some of our, similar to our legislation that protected girls' sports. If you really want a promises made, promises kept candidate, not just a promises made candidate, but a promises made and promises kept candidate, there's only one choice, and that's Eddie Andrews. Hope to have your support on June 2nd in the Republican primary. Thank you.
Zach Lane, you have 60 seconds for your closing statement.
Yeah, thank you both for putting the debate on, and thank you to those who watched and took part in this. You know, we are a couple weeks away from possibly one of those consequential elections that we've had in Iowa in a very long time, and this primary really matters. You know, my campaign is about putting Iowa first, and that has been something I think when we go talk to Iowans across the state, that they keep asking, why are we electing people, Republicans included, and things aren't changing systemically? We still have these big long-term issues that we're facing. And I often say that's because we are actually fighting against the uniparty. That is politicians from both sides who have been captured by corporate interests, special interests, and lobbyists that are doing the will of them rather than the will of the people. It is time that we put Iowa and Iowans first. That's the entire reason I'm running this campaign. Look, we have a chance on June 2nd to beat Randy Feenstra and have a true conservative be going against Rob Sand. I know that can be our campaign. We can do this, win on June 2nd and win in November.
Brad Sherman, I'm going to guess you think you're the best guy. So how about 60 seconds to close us out here?
Yeah, well, we need truth and integrity in government. If we don't have truth and integrity, we won't have anything. And I've been making 4 promises around the state. Number 1, and Mike Huckabee told me something. He said, the most dangerous guy in the room is the guy who doesn't know that he doesn't know. And so nobody knows everything. Getting elected doesn't make you infallible. You have to admit mistakes when you make mistakes. And I've seen a lot of cases where that should have been done. Second promise is that I will not please everyone, and that's a given, but it's based on the fact that I know what my core principles are. Those won't be changing, and I won't be pleasing people. Third, I will not be bought. Government is not for sale. I heard someone say, are you going to run for governor one day? A certain person was asked that question, are you going to run for governor one day? And the person said, no, it's easier to buy a governor than run for governor. Well, that won't be me. I won't be bought. And the fourth promise is we're going to seek Almighty God through prayer and wise counselors to make the decisions that are best for the people of the state of Iowa. And that's what it's going to take to turn the state around and give a whole new complexion to state government.
All right, Adam Steen.
Yeah. This is quite possibly the most important election in the history of the state of Iowa. June 2nd will determine who is going to take on Rob Sand. If Rob Sand comes in as governor, kiss your freedom, kiss your culture, goodbye. We need a candidate who is time tested. We need a candidate with experience. I've got 18 years as a business owner. I've got 5 years in government operation. I'm time tested. I'm a fighter. I fight for my family every single day. I get knocked down, I don't stay down. I develop scars over the course of my career and the course of my life, but there's one thing that I do, is that I fight. And when I fight, I win. And you have my commitment, every single Iowan out there, that I will fight for you as hard as I fight for my family every single day.
We thank you, the 4 of you, for agreeing to take part in this debate, and thanks for, and a special thanks for following our clock,
Yes.
so we could get to a lot of these questions. So we very much appreciate that.
And thank you, viewers at home, for tuning in. We want to remind you that the primary election is on June 2nd. Early voting is already underway, so if you want, you can go ahead and cast your ballot now. Thanks for tuning in. Have a great night.